Marvel's heroic mutants make a glorious return in the recently concluded XMen 97, and this animated series successfully picked up threads from the original 90s X-Men cartoon series. The high-grade production values, authentic comic book plotlines, and a grand finale summed up the first kickoff to a promising revival of the X-Men, and the fans are now looking forward to Season 2, which has been formally confirmed. We have had a bit of a cliffhanger climax in Season 1, and in this video we will try to analyze where the story will be headed next and explore everything that can happen in the upcoming season. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
Nathan, come.
How does the ending of Season 1 set up the upcoming events? X-Men 97 picks up from exactly the point where the 90s animated series had left off, and at the same time, one doesn't have to necessarily watch the original show to make sense of all that is happening here. After some gritty and intense episode, it all came down to the X-Men dealing with a world-ending threat in the three-part season finale. On one hand, Bastion and his Prime Sentinels intended to eliminate mutant kind, and on the other hand, an aggrieved and disillusioned Magneto went back to his villainous ways and planned the extinction of humanity as a revenge for the mutant massacre on Genosha. Luckily for the X-Men, Professor Xavier came back from his adventures in the Shi'ar Empire and rejoined the X-Men to guide them through these troubled times. The season finale saw some major events from the comic books, such as the time when Magneto ripped up the adamantium from Wolverine's body and left him in a near-dead situation. In the final episode, Xavier used his psychic powers to take over Magneto's mind, and he tried to undo all the damage done by Magneto earlier when he shut down the infrastructure and power grids of the world with his powerful electromagnetic pulse. Meanwhile, the X-Men successfully stopped Bastion's Prime Sentinels and drove him to desperation, where he decided to crash Asteroid M on the Earth and bring about global extinction. Finally, with a little help from Magneto, the X-Men managed to destroy the giant rock and the world was saved for the time being. However, all is not well because the X-Men are now scattered across various timelines, both in the past and in an apocalyptic future. They are presumed dead in the present world, where President Kelly's mutant-friendly reign is threatened by the rise of Graydon Creed, an anti-mutant rhetoric. Forge is the only one in the present timeline, and he is visited by Bishop, who informs him about the fate of the X-Men and reveals that they would have to help out the mutant superheroes. The season ends with a glimpse of where the X-Men are, and we see one group comprising Professor Xavier, Magneto, Beast, Rogue, and Nightcrawler in ancient Egypt, where they come across none other than the notorious Saba-Nur, aka Apocalypse, who is probably yet to become the villain we know him to be. Meanwhile, Cyclops and Jean Grey are in the year 3960 AD, and this is an apocalyptic future where they come across a young Nathan and Mother Ascani, who is actually their daughter Rachel Summers from an alternate timeline. So now comes the major question: where will all this lead to in Season 2? What caused the X-Men to travel across time? This is one of the first things that come to mind when we try to speculate the possible events of the next season. It has been left as a mystery, and even Bishop doesn't have a clue about what possibly caused the X-Men to scatter across various timelines. One of the most popular fan theories in this regard is that Bastion is responsible for the entire time-traveling saga. Previously, during a confrontation with Cable, Bastion ripped out his cybernetic arm and we saw his body absorb the arm, which probably also means that Bastion absorbed a techno-organic virus. Aside from Cable's time-traveling device on his arm, the techno-organic virus was also responsible for his ability to move across timelines. At the end of the season finale, Bastion allows himself to be drawn into the core of Asteroid M, and the massive explosion might have triggered mechanisms of Cable's device, causing the timeline to malfunction. The X-Men suffered from the impact, and they got thrown into different timelines in the past and the future as an effect. Another potential reason behind the bizarre time travel can be the interference of a cosmic entity like the Watcher. This may have been caused to avoid a great universal disaster that the X-Men are capable of averting. Whatever the reasons may be, we expect the X-Men to pick up from where they are stranded in the climatic moments of Season 1. They clearly have a lot to fix in each timeline, and we will explore their missions shortly.
What is your name?
My name
is En Sabanur.
Will Season 2 be all about Apocalypse? Many of those watching the series predicted the arrival of Apocalypse at some point, and the narrative handled the announcement very smartly, introducing the big baddie at the very end of the first season. There are plenty of hints that suggest the importance of Apocalypse in the upcoming season, and we might just get to see multiple versions of this powerful villain in the past, present, and future. Firstly, as we have discussed before, Professor Xavier, Magneto, Rogue, Nightcrawler, and Beast come across En Sabanur, who in all likelihood is yet to achieve the peak of his powers. The upcoming season can provide us with a solid origin story of Apocalypse, given that the stage has been set at where it all started for him. In the comic books, Apocalypse is born as En Sabanur and abandoned at birth because of his gray skin and blue lips. He is born with the mutant X gene, and the young En Sabanur is rescued by Bale of the Sandstormers. He starts off as someone who is selfless and compassionate, before turning to his evil side, and chances are that the X-Men in ancient Egypt have come across this version of Apocalypse. In the background, an advanced dome is visible in the scene, and this can be a hint about the arrival of Kang the Conqueror in Egypt. The comic book narrative elaborates on how a time-traveling Kang the Conqueror took over as Pharaoh Ramatut with his futuristic armies and technology. In the process, Apocalypse's guardian and mentor Bale is killed, and the fury and urge for revenge triggers his villainous side. We have seen in the final moments of Season 1 that En Sabanur is saved by the X-Men from a group of warriors who have probably been sent by Ramatut. It is the possession of the advanced futuristic technology that gives Apocalypse a majority of his powers and makes him near invincible, and thus you may expect something similar to go down in Season 2. However, this might also be an opportunity to change the future timeline and the fate of Apocalypse. We expect the X-Men to fight alongside him against the tyrannical Pharaoh Ramatut, and you will probably see them defeating his evil reign. But can they really stop En Sabanur from being corrupted by certain circumstances? X-Men 97 has given a lot of time for the resurgence arc of Magneto, but it is unlikely that the show will do the same for Apocalypse as well. Besides, we have already found out that certain events in the timeline, such as the Genosha massacre, cannot be undone even by going back in time. Apocalypse becoming a universal villain and causing all the violence that follows might be one of these irreparable events. Thus, Season 2 will likely see En Sabanur turning into the dreaded Apocalypse, even though he will be briefly fighting by the X-Men side against Kang the Conqueror. How much of the dystopian future can the X-Men really change? We have to wait and watch out for the results of this complex time-traveling narrative. What is Apocalypse doing in the present timeline? Is Gambit going to become one of his horsemen? The post-credits scene comes as a surprise because we did not expect Apocalypse to be in the present timeline as well, after being shown several thousand years in the past as En Sabanur. However, the brief post-credits scene shows him exploring the ruins of Genosha. He almost regrets the massacre and devastation, and then he comes across one of Gambit's cards in the rubble. His face breaks into a cunning smile as the scene cuts off, and it is a popular opinion that this scene is a hint towards the fate of Gambit in the upcoming season. Earlier in the show, Gambit had sacrificed himself to save the mutants and his love interest Rogue from the deadly attack on Genosha by the Prime Sentinels of Bastion. There was no pretense around his death, and the scene even showed Rogue crying over his lifeless body. Now, the only thing that can bring him back is someone like Apocalypse with his ability to revive the dead. It has already been established that Genosha cannot be undone, and thus Gambit's potential comeback can be as one of Apocalypse's horsemen of death. Now, this is not unheard of because something similar happens in the comic books, although under different circumstances. In the comics, Gambit is manipulated by Apocalypse to serve him as one of his horsemen after he is disillusioned by the mutant massacre by Scarlet Witch. Apocalypse seems to be sympathetic to the mutant cause, and Gambit believes that he offers a chance for the few surviving mutants to flourish because he is a believer in the survival of the fittest. Also, a major factor behind this manipulation is the role played by Mystique to distance Gambit from her adoptive daughter Rogue. She creates a rift between the two and even orchestrates a love triangle featuring a mutant named Pulse who is immune to Rogue's life-draining powers. A heartbroken and purposeless Gambit finds his true calling as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death, and he launches some deadly attacks on the X-Men, including Rogue. Ultimately, Apocalypse is defeated and Gambit goes back to his original self, and we expect something on these lines to happen in X-Men 97 Season 2. Although the circumstances are clearly different, a resurrected Gambit will be no less dangerous for the X-Men, especially if he is brought back as one of Apocalypse's Horsemen of Death. In the present timeline, none of the major X-Men are present, and you expect Gambit to take on the new members of the team led by Forge, which brings us to our next big question.
Are you okay?
We're not alone.
What will Cyclops and Jean Grey's future timeline look like? As we have discussed before, Cyclops and Jean Grey find themselves in what looks like a dystopian future. They are surrounded by a group of warriors commanded by a figure in robes who reveals herself as Mother Ascani. Meanwhile, a young boy named Nathan tells them that Cyclops and Jean Grey mean no harm, and this is when they realize that they are stuck in the future where their son Nathan is yet to grow up into the adult Cable. This provides Cyclops and Jean Grey with a great opportunity to train and groom young Nathan into a capable soldier, so that Cable in the future is capable enough. They can also teach him to use his psychic powers more effectively, and this will be a fun throwback to a comic book miniseries called The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, where they get a chance to send their minds to the future to raise Nathan Summers. Meanwhile, Mother Ascani is not a random addition to the series, and she is actually Rachel Summers, the daughter of Cyclops and Jean from an alternate reality. She has a major role in the Days of the Future Past timeline in comic books, and we expect her to have an impactful appearance in the upcoming season. In the comics, she tries to change the timeline to a better one, and she even attracts the Phoenix Force and becomes a successor host after Jean Grey. We also expect Apocalypse to have a role in the future timeline as well. This will round off the story perfectly, as various members of the X-Men will be dealing with Apocalypse in the past, present, and the future. The role of Professor Xavier and the others fighting alongside young En Sabanur might be to avoid the disastrous future where Apocalypse brings about a great doom. But that will probably not work so easily. Indeed, the upcoming Season 2 seems to be the perfect age of Apocalypse in great detail, and we the fans aren't complaining.
To me, my X-Men.
Can we see a new X-Men team in the present timeline? All the major X-Men members are either stuck in an apocalyptic future or in the past, and someone needs to structure a team to deal with the threats in the present timeline. Luckily, the photos and status of various mutants on Forge's wall reveal that many of them are still out there. If you zoom into the board, you can see that the likes of Colossus, his sister Magic, Iceman, Dust, Havoc, Exodus, Shadowcat, and Emma Frost are still around, and we would be disappointed if Forge doesn't rally them up to be the Team B for the X-Men. Also, Cable is stuck in the present timeline because without his arm and time-traveling device, he no longer can go back to his own time. We expect him to seek out Apocalypse in the present timeline because that might be the only way for him to restore the timeline as of now. However, we are yet to know about the fate of Wolverine, Storm, and Morph, and their role in the upcoming season will determine a lot of things in the narrative.
She can't say it, but I can.
I love you, Logan.
What happened to Wolverine, Storm, and Morph, and how can we see them in the upcoming narrative? Wolverine is down and out, but he is not dead after Magneto's brutal attack ripped out the adamantium from his body. His remarkable healing abilities are at work, and he seems to be in the process of recovery even though he is yet to regain consciousness. However, what happens to him hasn't been disclosed in the aftermath of the destruction of Asteroid M. We also don't know what happened to Storm and Morph, and there is a major possibility that the three of them had been transported to a different timeline. Are the three of them together? We don't know for sure, but they might just be, given how all three of them have been kept missing from the action in the end. In the comics, when Wolverine loses his adamantium, he heads out on his own and fights villains like Lady Deathstrike and Sabretooth. He is temporarily absent from his X-Men duties, and even without the adamantium in his system, he is quite effective with his bone claws. We can all expect him to act similarly in the upcoming season and head out on his own adventures for a while before rejoining the team to fight greater threats. Someone like Morph, who is quite attached to him in the show, might end up as his sidekick in his adventures, and Forge will surely try to reconnect with his beloved Aurora. That being said, Storm and Forge do not get a happily ever after in the comics, and it is unlikely that the show will proceed any differently in this regard. If none of this happens and they're all in the present timeline, something more sinister might await the fans. These three powerful mutants can be the perfect trio to complete Apocalypse's 4 Horsemen of Death alongside Gambit. This is indeed a mouth-watering prospect, and we can totally imagine the chaos and panic among the X-Men if something like this happens in the next season. However, we must admit that we are thinking a little too out of the box here, and even if something like this does happen, you can expect them to rejoin the X-Men pretty soon. Storm and Wolverine in particular are far too important characters to be turned evil and made to fight their former teammates for so long.
Stand down, Rogue.
Can we see the X-Men versus the Avengers in Season 2? One of the most noticeable stinks in Season 1 has been the numerous cameos of popular Marvel superheroes. We have seen a lot of them from Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, Silver Samurai, and even Doctor Strange, among others. It is clear from a few scenes in the season finale that the Avengers probably work for the government and are duty-bound even if they want to act otherwise. For instance, when President Kelly wanted to launch the missiles towards Asteroid M in a last-ditch attempt, Captain America and Black Panther advised against this process of activating the Magneto Protocol. Their opinions were dismissed in favor of an overwhelming opposition, and the missiles were launched as they watched helplessly. If the anti-mutant sentiments rise further, you can expect the X-Men to fight back, even if it is against a corrupt government regime. President Kelly is still a reasonable man, but the rise of Great and Creed can take things in a different direction. Under such circumstances, it wouldn't be surprising if you saw the Avengers fighting against the X-Men, and it has been established already that they all exist in the same universe, and it will be disappointing to not see more of these Marvel superheroes after so many subtle cameos throughout the series. Marvelous verdict. Looks like a better and grander Season 2 is in store for us. With a show as brilliant as X-Men 97, it is often a concern if the upcoming storyline will keep up with the near-perfect nature of the first season. From what we've seen in the climatic moments of Season 1, and all the theories that we've discussed above make it look like we will not be disappointed. With the announcement of greater and more powerful villains, and a complex narrative that derives heavily from some of the best X-Men comic books, you can expect an even better second season. We just hope that the writing standards are up to the mark like it was for Season 1, and with a second and third season already confirmed, X-Men 97 has the potential to go on to become one of the finest animated shows in the modern era. It is believed that work on Season 2 is almost nearing its end, and you can expect the next part to be released sometime next year. We would love to hear from you in the comments below about your thoughts on this wonderful animated series. And we'd also want you to tell us what you think might be the major events in Season 2. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.